My name's Frank Miller. I'm the Managing Director of Track Record Global. I and a couple of colleagues set up Track Record about 15 years ago. Track Record now, having built its reputation on timber due diligence, is now branching out into other areas. We provide timber due diligence services for DFS, Sofology and Dwell. And also we look at leather supply chains. And also, we're about to start a forced labor and modern slavery due diligence program as well. In terms of the timber, FSC certification covers all the E, S, and G issues that big companies like the DFS Group are concerned about. So it makes absolute sense that they mandate this as a requirement from their suppliers. There's a practical realization that climate change is going to have a material impact on supply chains. I mean, for instance, if you have a furniture factory in Vietnam, the predictions are that lots of Vietnam will be underwater. You're using clothes manufacturers in Bangladesh. A lot of Bangladesh floods a lot of the time as it is. It's going to flood a lot more. So I think there's those practical issues that are driving ESG awareness and the need for ESG assessments. And there's also concerns from shareholders, there's concerns from investors, there's concerns from staff that work for businesses. And I think, if you like, because there's an increasing level of transparency in supply chains, there's also an increasing level of awareness of what's going on. And in addition, because of COP26, the climate change conference in Glasgow, there's going to be a lot of new laws coming out of that. DEFRA has already framed new laws that are going to force big companies to carry out due diligence on their supply chains that could contribute to deforestation through their acquisition of various industrial agricultural commodities like soy, like palm oil, cocoa, beef, and so forth. And leather is part of that picture. Other retailers include Dreams, Dunelm, Habitat, Sainsbury's, Argos, WH Smith, Hobbycraft. They're all interested in supply chain transparency, in understanding different aspects of risks associated with the products that they buy, and basically managing those risks and being comfortable that they are not basically contributing to environmental damage or social issues and so forth. So they want to understand what's happening in their supply chain, just like DFS does, so that they can manage those risks and move away from risky situations if they identify them. The major challenges, I think, are systematic methodology that is repeatable. It can be put in place and operated in a cost-efficient manner. You can't have independent third parties basically assessing each of your supply chains because of the cost. So you need a cost-efficient methodology so that you can qualify those risks and manage those risks appropriately, mitigate them or or move away from them. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. Track Record Global's developed a model over the last decade that basically has three core elements: inherent risk, mitigating evidence, and residual risk. Every product that exists, as far as Track Record is concerned, has an inherent risk, an inherent ESG risk. A piece of timber that comes from Sweden has a relatively low inherent risk because the regulatory capacity in Sweden is very strong and robust. They have great forest laws. They're able to make them work well. A piece of timber coming from the Democratic Republic of, say, Congo, because there is limited regulatory capacity, it's a massive country, small police force, the inherent risk there is very high. So our aim is to try and mitigate these risks. So we first of all qualify the inherent risk. Then we go out to collect mitigating evidence where possible to offset that inherent risk. So if we're collecting documentation to offset the risk from, say, for a product from Sweden, it'd be very limited. It might be just a piece of evidence to show that the timber came from Sweden. If we were going out to try and mitigate the risk for a piece of timber from the Democratic Republic of Congo, then we'd almost certainly, we would need an independent third-party audit of that forest that was supplying the timber. And then each step along the way, we'd require very carefully specified mitigating evidence to offset the risk. And then when you've gathered all the mitigating evidence, you've qualified the inherent risk, you've gathered the mitigating evidence to ameliorate, to offset that inherent risk, what you're left with is the residual risk, the risks that you can't mitigate any further. And if that's above the threshold that's set by our clients, then basically we're saying that supply chain is a risky one. If that residual risk is below the level set by our clients, then we're saying that risk is negligible and therefore is acceptable. That's the methodology. And the great thing is that methodology is repeatable and then comparable. So each year you can see how the risks change, and are things improving or are they getting worse? FSC is a voluntary program, and it's great in as much that it covers all the ESG issues associated with wood-based material supply chains. So covers them in the forest, and also increasingly covers them in the supply chain as well, with all the primary, secondary, and tertiary processes. It's a really good program. It's well established. It's been adapted for each individual country. It's a good way to go. And also, there are many thousands of businesses that have been through the certification process with FSC. So it's had all the rough edges knocked off it, and it's attainable by anyone with the right degree of effort. Track Record Global started off in the timber sector, and then over time, as people have become more concerned about ESG performance in other supply chains, the areas that we cover have spread. So we now work in cotton, leather for the DFS Group, and also a recent area that we're expanding into is due diligence in forced labor and modern slavery. And on that, we're working with Ardia International and Colleen Theron, and I think you'll be hearing from her in a session after this one. The advice that I'd give to the retailers and the people that work with them is that, it's a collaborative effort that we're involved in here. Climate change is something that's going to affect absolutely all of us, no matter where you are in the supply chain. And I think it takes everyone acting in a partnership, really, to get a thorough picture of what's happening in supply chains, to really deliver that supply chain transparency. It involves everyone. So I think people need to understand that sharing of information is a good and important thing. And all suppliers, whether they're a tier 1, tier 2, or wherever they are in the supply chain process, that it's really important for businesses to be able to understand what those ESG risks are. And I think there was a good quote in the Financial Times on the 5th of January this year, and it says that ESG is moving from the margins to the main stage. And big companies, investors, shareholders, staff are all focused on ESG performance. And it's basically really important that all supply chain actors get involved and contribute to make sure that the risks are managed.